I think the discussion was that you were going to show us something, and then we were going to try and figure out how it works.
Yeah, I think so too. So, part of what I was interested in, and we talked about this a little bit, is the difference between Aikido and jiu-jitsu methodology when exploring or experiencing a technique. And so, so the cool thing is we're kind of doing this cold, so there's not a rehearsal or anything, and so it should have some built-in authenticity because of that.
So the only thing then I'd suggest is to connect our previous session with this one. I'll show a bit of the video, and when you see something, you're like, okay, I want to try this.
Oh, okay.
Just let me know, and then I can replicate it.
Perfect. So let's can we go back? Sure. Almost the first thing, whatever the clothesline, the thing where so he comes up, he comes at him, boom, he turns him, and then he does that. Yes. Yeah, he does this where it's like it looks to me like World Wrestling Federation. He gives him a clothesline.
So yeah, sure. That technique is called irimi nage. Irimi Japanese is for entering, nage is for a throw. Steven Seagal is famous.
Yes, that's where I've seen it.
Okay.
Right. And there's two versions.
Under Siege.
Right, exactly. He does that all the time. It looks good on.
Yeah.
So that technique, it can be done in a couple of different ways. And in this particular style, they use a lot of circular motion. So it's a bit more round. Seagal does it straight in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah. Use me.
Yes. So there's the cutting motion.
Okay, so I'm coming in for just this.
So I enter, block, I pass the motion. So that's the blending part. I'm using the energy of the opponent. I'm entering in. That's the entering that I mentioned. The idea is that I bring you out of balance towards myself, cutting with a cutting motion, and also using the elbow here. I'm opening up the space, bringing the person out of balance down. Then normally there's a bit of a raise up. What I used to do, I would push here with the elbow, bring the person out, and I would rotate the arm here, and then there's the hips turn out, and I step in to do the throw here. Boom. So that's kind of the replication of the technique.
So if you could break that into, call it 3 points, because that's going to help me to understand it.
So there's the entering.
Okay.
So there's the cutting. I enter.
1.
Then I give space and bring out the balance, and then I bring out and use my arm to throw.
Okay, you probably saw what his feet were doing, because I think there was more than some.
Entering, stepping out to give space, and then it's a lot. Hip movement, and then entering again. Obviously, you can kind of adapt, but that's basically what happens.
So talk us through it.
You guys gonna try it?
Yeah,
we're gonna try it.
Sure. So there's the cutting motion.
All right.
You enter through, block this hand. Normally, what in Aikido we do, there's more of this type of.
Oh, okay. That's like old school JKD.
I'd imagine so. Yeah.
Like
yes,
that.
Yes. Then this time goes on the shoulder or the arm. So the idea is to blend.
Oh, okay.
There's cutting motion. Sorry.
And then I'm going to be moving towards the back.
Right. There's a point
And
of contact. Turn, bring it down. Yes, exactly. And the idea officially is the person wants to naturally come up. The uke part, the cooperation. Yeah, exactly. You can either pull the person in or step in forward.
So the Aikido world is going to focus on this and then tell me how terrible my technique is.
There. Coach John is doing a great job being the good, what's called in Japanese, uke, the receiver.
Well, I am trying to feed, and I'm trying to imagine, hi, I'm stupid, and I'd like to do this.
My question then is, if we were in an Aikido class and you were coaching and you were and in a typical Aikido class we were learning this technique, is this what it would look like?
Exactly, exactly. And then one side, other side, switch most of the time.
Okay. My next question then would be, okay, so we do that and then we get pretty good at it, and then I can do it to John can do it to me, we look really beautiful at it, and everything looks great. And then what happens?
The next level at best would be what's called randori. So first of all, this attack comes up numerous times, and then you can do different techniques. That's the next level. You don't exactly know which technique you would do. So let's say the attack is defined, the guy is just chopping his arms, and I bring him out to do one technique, different technique, third technique.
So you randomize it a little bit.
Yeah.
And so he has limited techniques.
Oftentimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can expand, but a lot of times it's just like, I'm going to attack you like this.
But you never do, I can do anything. So maybe I have to start with this,
Right.
but once I get here, I can be like, whoa.
Well, this would not happen. No, this would not happen. What could happen is, okay, I'll do this, and maybe this, like specific Aikido attacks, and oftentimes they're really like, you really telegraph. So I'm like, I'm coming in, like, I'm gonna do this. And you're
Okay.
like, okay, thank you. Oh, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. So you're not really surprising the person?
So why don't I feed it to you, and then I will add what I consider a few times where I can already tell you that even if for some odd reason I decided to be stupid and do this.
We'll just make that a given.
Yeah, I'm going to be stupid, but there's all sorts of places where I think, I don't want to do any more. Yes.
Yeah, and so I think what you're describing now is a change in training methodology that happens with jiu-jitsu where we would not be satisfied with that, and then we would be saying, well, what if? And then does this actually work? And then how would we know if it actually works? So rather than just looking at a technique and saying, well, that works or that doesn't work, then we apply a method to figure it out.
Yep.
And so I guess that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And so, and when you do that, in jiu-jitsu, we do apply what we call progressive resistance, which means we don't have to go balls out in doing the technique. We can start out at a little bit slower speed so that everybody can kind of understand what's going on, but we can still apply resistance in that method. And I don't know what John's going to do, and he doesn't know how I'm going to react, but we're going to start with that same entry so we have some defined variables to work with, and then now he can begin to apply some progressive resistance. Let's see what happens. I have no idea what's going to happen. That felt a little clunkier for me because his head moved in a funny way, and I wasn't quite sure what was going on. But I still accomplished it, so he still let me finish it. But he was making a little bit of resistance there. And then so I'm going to ask John, do that again. So he's kind of thwarting my chopping motion by bringing his head down. And then so in a jiu-jitsu world, I'd want to be able to figure that out, what's going on there. And so, okay, now I beat him to that time.
Okay.
And so what's going on?
So we're just going to isolate this
Let's
first.
just isolate that first part because, yeah, I think what was happening is I was finding this. Right. My hand wasn't coming around that side, and then you were turning into me. I'm like, okay. So I just discovered that if I'm not fast enough with that chopping hand, then he can get his head underneath. Yeah, and then I end up with that. And so that's a problem. And so what can I do to fix it? I can be a little faster with my chopping hand, and I can get it on that side a little bit faster. So there's something I could do. That's all right. Second thing I can do is I need a response for if I do miss that one, I need another response. And so there's some jiu-jitsu going on there. And so now I got two things I can do. And so he's just double my responses with his slight bit of resistance there. And now he can feed me both things where I get a chance to get my hand on the right side. And I'm only isolating that part, and other stuff that happens, it doesn't matter. And so now I got something going on there, and just with that one part. I'm like, all right, maybe something going on there, might be useful, might not.
What I do feel is if you get over and you get this round here and you take that big step while I'm still in this vector, right here, I do feel exposed by this technique. I mean, I do feel if I find myself bulldogging there and your footwork is right, that could be legit.
Yeah, and so, and that position, now I'm looking at that position thinking, oh, here's a positional thing that looks kind of interesting to me, because it could be something that happens in jiu-jitsu off, you know, a crappy shot maybe. Yeah, there it is. If I can stop my arm, then I'm in that position there.
Right.
And then is that something that'll work? I'm not really sure. But now I'm starting to see some other places why they might happen. The thing that I'm seeing is you could take that simple Aikido technique, and then just by looking at different parts of it, break it down and to find some parts, maybe the roots of it where at one point there was some really good usable stuff there,
right.
Or how to apply it in other situations where I know there's some usable stuff. Now, what do you see?
I definitely see, I'm going to start with the beginning.
Yeah.
If it's a world full of things I either cut you with or hit you with, I don't have a problem. But somebody walks up to me and says, hey, you got a problem? I mean, nobody goes, hey, you got a problem? I'd be like, I don't want to fight this guy because this guy is weird. It's really weird.
Yes.
I guess that would be is there a way to get this technique to work off of that?
I could offer one solution based on Aikido. So basically, there's this punch, this infamous punch of Aikido where you lounge, step, punch, and stop. And it doesn't really make sense unless we see it as a push. So if you're pushing me, so I step to the side, again, that's the blocking motion. I step in here again, and then the same motion continues. So this could be kind of an interpretation of more of a...
So that I can shove that off to the side now. I'm in that same spot.
Right.
And so,
That's the best probably.
sure. So if he puts his hands on me and I turn there, it automatically creates that shearing vector, right? There, so it'll create that shearing vector, maybe. And now you've just taken that technique and you brought it back to a level where you're encountering something that might be a little more encounterable. And so now we're going to move around a little bit, and then John's just going to put his hands on me, and I'm just going to work that part. Now, I'm kind of curious to see if when he's pushing, if I can with my body deflect that arm a little bit. And so I'm kind of testing, and then he's going to give me some feedback like, I think that's okay, or I think that's not okay.
If I didn't know jacket grappling, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't work anymore.
Oh yeah. Unless, okay, well, again, if I throw out Aikido stuff, so there's the grab.
Yeah.
Technically what would be suggested, we apply what's called a temi, so kind of an opening strike. So I can also grab, so there's the strike where then you slide in, turn, get that wrist out, and then I could enter to the technique. But then again, if you're nice and calm and just standing there, or I'm super fast, technically, but at the same time I think you already see a bunch of things which are like, and what's interesting too, where that punching, we never even touch. You're just putting that arm there, and I learned through experience that if in reality such a moment comes, I'm not used to punching, so that's great.
Well, and so now we're kind of in that spot where we discovered that there might be something that can happen here if he puts his hand flat, and I do that, I might be able to create an initial deflection, and then, you know, maybe I can get to the technique from there, maybe not, but we're kind of gauging one thing at a time, and then there's a grab. And so now he's giving me some resistance, so now I got some progressive resistance here, and then my thought is, all right, if I'm still testing this technique, I need to get to that position, so am I going to be able to create a break that's going to allow me to get there? Is that something that's going to work? I don't know. And so now we're going to test that a little bit. Sometimes John will just put his hand on me and then I'm going to hit. Sometimes he'll put his hand on me and grab. And when I encounter that resistance, can I pull it off and then get there? That allows me to kind of work some progressive resistance. And so now we're looking at a different part of that technique, right? And so we backed out. And so before we were kind of accepting the chop and then seeing how that kind of worked off the chop, apply some progressive resistance to that, seeing where we hit snag spots, and then troubleshoot some differences. And then John said, well, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't karate chop unless I had a hatchet, you know. And then I might not hit you that way. And so let's take the initial entry and make it more realistic. we did with the push, and then John said, well, I might just grab you. And then now we got to problem solve that part. And we still haven't gotten to the technique yet because we encountered all this resistance before we got to that point. So I don't know if the technique works or not.
I'd like to see you do it so I can watch your footwork, because like I said, once you got me turned, I did feel vulnerable. I mean, I felt like my posture's screwed up. I don't have access to my physicality now.
So which one do you do? You're chopping?
Yeah.
So here, sure. Here, boom. This is obviously what we're
Okay. Yeah, one more time.
Yeah, this is still more compact. Like, we try to always look nice and have a nice posture, but the more resistance.
Well, I think, every jiu-jitsu coach has experienced this, that when I show a technique, it will look amazing. Right. And then if I see it in a roll, it doesn't look amazing, except to us who've experienced doing things in a roll versus showing them as a technique when I'm about to teach it. And if you approach what I would call about half the beauty, it looks beautiful. Right. Because we all know to pull that off in live resistance at especially competition level, that's amazing. When you do it, it's like, that's beautiful.
Right, and so the argument maybe should not be whether or not this technique works or not, because as soon as you make that argument, you're going to get, and I'm sure you will in YouTube, you're going to get 5 people who say, I know it works because I've seen so-and-so do it, or so-and-so did it in a street altercation, a guy was coming at him with a knife and then he did it and then it worked, so therefore I know it works. And so as soon as you make that argument, then you get lost in that loop. So instead of making that argument whether it works or not, we do what we're doing here. Yep. And then you just apply some testing to it, and then you can find out, is this something that I'm going to be able to use? Because I really don't care if you can use it. That's cool. I'm really interested in whether or not I can use it.
I'm trying to take the steps out of the footwork.
It felt shorter.
Yeah, it needs to be shorter.
Okay, so it's too exaggerated, right?
Yeah.
And again, we're accepting the chop for
I'm
now.
accepting the chop because I kind of want to
technique.
get to just what I need to do to make this work. Only the portion of taking somebody down. I almost want to say, I don't know, maybe I get here like this, and then I can be like...
Because that was the question for me, even when I was instructing, like this whole idea that, and this is like, you can go directly in, but normally it's, you bring the person out. And for me, there's so much that can happen there. I mean, when you bring that person out, it's a big gap, it's a long time, the person you push out, turn out, just a lot of things.
Right, so you're seeing an immediate hole in the chopping motion, that it feels really big and a lot of space.
There's a lot of space, and I don't see somebody doing it, so I'm trying to figure out maybe a way for me to do what I think is the more important, the piece that feels like when you did it to me, I felt like I'm compromised. I'm going to end up on the ground.
Yeah, when you get to the back.
And so maybe the initiation is not by this person. I'm going to start here. From there, very common collar sleeve, and then as I duck under,
That looks better.
does it feel like once I pulled you off, you're compromised?
It does. It feels to me like as soon as you duck under, then I'm in a scrambly battle where I'm already 3 steps behind. And so,
Yes, right.
Sure. I think so. And so, again, you just found another way to kind of functionalize the karate chop, and now you've shortened that big sweeping thing into something that shortens the amount of time and gets you to a faster connection.
Yeah.
Which is naturally going to be necessary because, when you started adding a little bit of progressive resistance, I found that. And then I look, and then your head's in my chest.
Right.
I wasn't able to get there because the amount of time it takes for me to swim over the top and chop was kind of a long amount of time. Whereas if you're just ducking your head under, it's much faster.
Right. And that's a movement that my opponent can't really do very much to do except with their whole body. So if he stays upright, he uses all his upper body to keep me from ducking under. He's never going to be able to do it. But if we're here, and as soon as he feels me start to change levels, he changes levels. I think the flavor of the, I'll season the technique. As an upper body response, they're trying to muscle me. That's this. And I'm just applying good grappling by changing my level and getting to the second part of the technique. Maybe that makes it more valuable.
So that level change really solved a lot of stuff there.
Well, it means that I don't have to wait for you to pick up your sword and try and chop me. It means I get to do this game that I already know about, and then as soon as I feel your upper body start to muscle.
And then you find yourself in that spot.
My question is the big dilemma.
And so, what ends up happening, and I can see it happening already, is that my responses to the technique start to look a whole lot more like wrestling.
Right.
That's what it looks like. An interesting story. There was a guy who's a famous Wing Chun guy who has a gym in Atlanta, who I used to kind of know a little bit because I trained with one of his students back in the 80s. He had the Wing Chun dummies and all that stuff in his gym. When he would spar, his sparring looked just like boxing. 100% like boxing. And then the line then was, well, no, he's just applying Wing Chun principles to boxing. And I couldn't get my head around it. I'm like, but it looks just like boxing, so why isn't it boxing? And I never could get my head around that because it wasn't true. It didn't make sense. What was happening was that when he came down to a real scenario where he needed to defend himself, he'd go back to what works, which was Western boxing and not Wing Chun striking. So his structure would change from Wing Chun to boxing. And then his punches were boxing punches. And this was a guy who was one of the best Wing Chun guys in the world. It's because it didn't work. And then so you can sort of see some of the same thing happening here. We have a technique that's practiced without any progressive resistance, and it feels really good. And it's certainly possible that somebody's going to pull it off at some time, but it's probably not the best response. Right. And then when you start adding some creative resistance and working with, well, what if the feeder was a little more intelligent? And what the feeder do, then it starts to change a little bit. And then John starts talking about, well, here's what my response would be as a feeder. Here's what my response would be if the guy did that. It starts to morph the technique, and pretty soon it doesn't look like that technique anymore. It looks like something else. And so the whole conversation is shifted to whether or not this technique would work or not, and to what would my response be if somebody did this. And the technique is already gone. We've already lost the technique we started with, I think.
All but. And at this point, I would not really even be interested in talking about whether or not it's a cool technique or not, because it seems more or less pointless in a discussion. And then what's the more interesting part is the three of us getting together and then working with a little bit of progressive resistance, some common scenarios that you might face, and then using what we already know to apply, and then test it again with a little bit of resistance to see what would happen. And then the original technique we started with kind of becomes irrelevant, and so by default we've thrown it out. Yeah? I think that's true. What do you think? Well, there was a lot there. So I think the one place where for this technique, I felt the moment I was broken over, and if my back became rounded, I could easily be taken over. Now, whether that's just some instance of, well, here's this little cue of body mechanics where the technique is absolutely true, and I can borrow that, I'd totally steal from it, then perfect. But I agree with you everywhere else.
So you found one little part that felt interesting to you.
Yeah.
And then you would be like, let's explore that one little part.
Right.
And so you could extract that out of the technique and then apply jiu-jitsu methodology to it, right?
And that's what I tried to do with it.
Can you put me in that spot so I can visualize where that was?
So it was, I'm gonna use my jiu-jitsu grips. And so whether my hand's there, it's here.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I felt like, maybe it's a knee tap. But I feel like the moment I have you broken this way, you're naturally going to do exactly what Rokas said. You're going to start to sit up.
Yeah.
And I'm going to feel that and just take you back.
Yeah. And then so now, we could isolate that. And so we could go to that spot right there. And then we'd get here and we'd start from this spot. And then John would say, go.
Go.
And then we're going to see what would happen, and then we just do a bunch of rounds from that, just kind of seeing what would happen, and then we'd maybe have some conversation at some point about what's working, what's not working, and then we've taken that little piece out that showed some potential, and then put it in a real lab. And so instead of John doing this 500 times and then me being satisfied with that, we got something in a bit more of a realistic scenario.
It just struck me, I'll say one more thing. So as a technique, there was a lot going on with all that. In fact, if I really wanted to teach that, I would almost think I'd have to teach it in 3 or 4 days to get people to do it right. I'm going to give you another takedown, and I'm just going to, I don't even care how we get here. I'm just going to do a cross ankle pick. That's the footwork. That's a takedown. So that is a specific attachment, and we can talk about what I need to do for that to be successful, what I need to do to be successful with my footwork to get the response, and then how I pick up the foot.
Yeah. And that one technique would be a whole class for you. Easy.
That would be a whole class for me, and that just had 3 parts. So methodologically, that's something that after an hour, I could see at the beginning, it looks kind of ugly. By the end, it looks a lot better, and people are getting it probably in live rounds.
And live round, to clarify for people who don't know, live rounds might not be we're open sparring and everybody can do what they want. You would create a scenario where the situation would happen over and over again, but there'd be some form of resistance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what you mentioned, that dilemma comes up often for people who try to functionalize Aikido, is how much Aikido is there at all in the end. And I know a bunch of people try to functionalize Aikido, and eventually they were just like, it's like, doesn't make sense, let's just move on to jiu-jitsu. That's what I did as well, that was my conclusion. Do you think that's probably like the natural thing for people to do, or do you think it makes sense for Aikido people, would make sense for Aikido people to just stick with what they know, add progressive resistance, and try to figure out things, or what's your opinion?
Do you remember what I said when so Coach Cane comes to me and says, John, Roka wants to do this video series, we're going to do this, and so tell me about what you think. And the very first thing we said on this issue is I said, well, doesn't that just turn Aikido into Judo?
Yeah.
And my expectation with this technique and doing that looks so much like, Sotogari, where I'm trying to catch. And I mean, so I think it probably does reduce to one of the combat sports that is a combat sport.
You'll end up with wrestling or judo or jiu-jitsu in the end, and so the fastest path would be to say, let's just go learn one of those. So you just have to find one of the arts that does live progressive resistance training, and then you're probably going to be okay. But if you add ego in, there may be some it may be a faster or better path for some people to, like, I can't let go of my Aikido yet, but I got to start functionalizing it. And some people just have to go through that. I was a Taekwondo player for 15 years. I was like 3rd or 4th degree black belt. It took me about 5 or 6 years to put that belt in the closet and then come out and learn some more functional stuff. It took a long time. And so, I don't make trivial of the fact that somebody who's achieved a lot of lineage and success in an art would just shelve it and say, and the fact that you're able to do that, it makes you actually pretty rare, because it's not that easy for people to do. And so everybody's path is going to be different. And I think if you're sincere and as honest as you can be with yourself in the moment about trying to find out what works, then you'll find your path. But absolutely the fastest path is just go find an art that trains against progressive resistance.
Yeah.
And the very last question for me is, John, you did find something where you're like, this is interesting. Do you think it's worthwhile, at least to some degree, to check that, or the best idea is still just there's already a lot of good stuff which is created, and there's no need to really go out there kind of search for it? Because honestly, I would be on the second part, on the second side myself, but I'm just curious.
I would just to echo Coach Cane, I would start with one of the arts that has progressive resistance built into the training methodology. And whether it turns out to be wrestling, jiu-jitsu, boxing, judo, it'll be more functional.
Well, this is very interesting to me because it took me about a year of trying to functionize Aikido, and eventually I was like, oh, it does make sense. I need to start learning. It took you guys 20 minutes to get to that conclusion, but you're experts. So, but it does seem that it's eventually it's like the inevitable. It's like gravity. Gravity is going to pull. It pulls down.
Yeah.
Whatever you think.
We have the advantage of not being Aikido experts, and so it's really easy for us to
Make that conclusion.
And so somebody who is, it's going to be much more difficult because you have a lot of baggage to push. So.
But I hope some people who are watching this with a curiosity of thinking, yeah, they're going to save Aikido. Hopefully they process this and go through the same mental.
Helio Gracie already saved Aikido. Right. He just called it jiu-jitsu.
Right.